The date is January 15th, 2025. If you could bottle the atmosphere inside the White House East Room that afternoon, you could sell it as high-grade narcotic to the Beltway press corps. It wasn't just anticipation, it was bloodlust. It was the electric, static charge of a gladiatorial arena moments before the gates lift. And sitting there, in the front row, bathed in the harsh glow of the camera lights, was the man who believed he was the gladiator holding the spear. Senator Adam Schiff. He sat with that practiced stillness of his, hands clasped, legs crossed, the faint, tight-lipped smile of a man who believes history is finally about to bend the knee to his will. To look at him, you wouldn't see a man walking to his execution. You saw a man who thought he was about to deliver the killing blow to the beast he'd been hunting for 8 long, obsession-fueled years. He checked his watch. 1:58 p.m., 2 minutes to showtime. To understand the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe that was about to unfold, you have to understand the delusion that fueled it. For weeks, the political ecosystem in Washington had been turned upside down by a single bizarre announcement from the Trump White House. The Transparency Initiative. That was the branding. President Trump, fresh off his inauguration, claiming he wanted to heal the divide by inviting his fiercest critics to ask him anything. Unfiltered, live. And the guest of honor? The man specifically invited by name? Adam Schiff. The media, naturally, went absolutely feral. CNN ran countdown clocks. MSNBC preempted their afternoon programming for the showdown. They called it the reckoning. They called it Schiff's moment. They painted a picture of a cornered Trump, desperate for legitimacy, foolishly inviting the one prosecutor smart enough to tear him apart on live television. Schiff bought the narrative. Hook, line, and sinker. He had spent the last fortnight preparing for this press conference, not like a politician, but like a grand inquisitor. His staff had wargamed every scenario. They had crafted questions that were less like inquiries and more like legal bear traps. They were designed to be unanswerable. Questions about the 2016 Trump Tower meeting, about Helsinki, about the compromising financial ties, about the dossier. Schiff had his opening salvo memorized. He practiced the cadence in the mirror. He knew exactly when to pause for effect, when to furrow his brow in that trademark expression of grave concern that had become his brand. He imagined the headlines the next morning. Schiff corners Trump, the president crumbles, finally, the truth. He looked around the room. It was packed beyond fire code capacity. The creme de la creme of the legacy media was there, Acosta, Tapper, the whole White House Correspondents' Dinner crowd, and they were all looking at him. They were nodding. They were winking. It was a silent encouragement from the tribe. Go get him, Adam. What Adam Schiff didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, because his entire worldview was constructed on a foundation of his own echo chamber, was that he wasn't the hunter. He was the bait. While Schiff was practicing his prosecutor voice in front of a mirror, a very different kind of preparation was happening in a windowless SCIF at FBI headquarters. There, Kash Patel, the man the D.C. establishment feared more than the plague, had been working in silence for 6 months. Patel wasn't writing questions. He was compiling receipts. He had pulled the raw feed, the unredacted truth, an 847-page dossier that mapped the DNA of a lie. Every classified briefing Schiff had attended since 2017. Every intelligence assessment the Gang of 8 had viewed. Every FBI counterintelligence report. Every CIA cable. And then he cross-referenced those hard facts with every single public statement Adam Schiff had made in the media. It was a forensic autopsy of deception, a literal timeline of treasonous hypocrisy. And the week before this press conference, President Trump had done the one thing Schiff never thought he would dare do. He didn't just read it. He declassified it. All of it. Schiff sat there adjusting his tie, oblivious to the fact that the sword of Damocles was already falling. He looked at the 2 massive LED screens flanking the presidential podium. The White House press secretary had said they were for multimedia transparency. Schiff assumed Trump would use them to show charts of the economy or maybe crowd sizes. He had no idea those screens were about to become his tombstone. 2 p.m. The door opened. The chatter in the room died instantly. replaced by the frantic mechanical shutter clicks of 100 cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Donald Trump walked in, and immediately anyone paying close attention, anyone who wasn't blinded by the partisan fog, would have noticed something was different. We are used to the rally Trump, the boisterous, energetic, improvisational showman who feeds off the crowd's energy, cracking jokes, riffing on headlines. That Trump was nowhere to be found today. The man who walked to the podium was different. He was calm, unsettlingly calm. He moved with a deliberate, predatory slowness. He didn't wave to the cameras. He didn't do the thumbs up. He walked to the podium, placed a single folder on the lectern, and set a small remote control beside it. He looked out at the room, scanning the faces. When his eyes landed on the front row, on Adam Schiff, he didn't scowl. He didn't sneer. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a poker player who is holding a royal flush while watching his opponent bet the deed to his house on a pair of twos. "Thank you all for being here," Trump began. His voice was lower than usual, modulated, lacking his typical bombast. "We have a lot to cover today. A lot of history to correct." Schiff leaned forward, pen poised over his notebook. He was ready to pounce on the first mistake, the first lie. "This press conference," Trump continued, resting his hands on the sides of the podium, "is about transparency. For 8 years, this city, this room, and certain people sitting in this room," his eyes flicked briefly to Schiff, "have told the American people a story about Russia, about collusion, about treason. You were told that there was evidence. You were told that the intelligence community had proof. You were told that the only reason you couldn't see that proof was because it was classified, because it was too dangerous to reveal." Trump paused. The room was dead silent. "They told you to trust them. They said, 'We've seen the documents. We've been to the briefings. We know the truth.' And because they had security clearances and you didn't, you had to believe them." Schiff felt a slight twinge of irritation. This was standard Trump rhetoric, the deep state whine. He prepared to interrupt, to pivot to his prepared question about the Helsinki summit. But today, Trump said, picking up the remote control, "We're going to change the rules. Because as of this morning, I have declassified everything." Schiff froze. The pen in his hand stopped moving. "Every briefing," Trump said, his voice hardening. "Every FBI report, every assessment, every document that the Gang of Eight saw from 2017 to today. It is all public. It is all online right now. And we're going to put it up on these screens." Trump looked directly at Adam Schiff. The eye contact was absolute. It was heavy. "We're going to compare what the documents actually said to what certain people told you they said." For the first time, a cold drop of sweat traced a path down Adam Schiff's spine. Declassified everything? That wasn't possible. The bureaucracy wouldn't allow it. The DOJ would block it. The CIA would redact it into oblivion. That was the game. That was how it worked. "You hide behind the black bars of redaction." "Senator Schiff," Trump said, the pleasantry dropping from his voice like a stone. "As promised, you have the first question." The camera swung around. A wall of lenses focused on Schiff. This was it. This was the moment he had rehearsed. The moment CNN was waiting for. Schiff stood up. He took the microphone from a white-gloved aide. He forced his face into that mask of stoic determination. He pushed down the sudden, rising nausea in his gut. He had to stick to the plan. Attack. Accuse. Frame the narrative. "Thank you, Mr. President," Schiff said. His voice was steady, trained for broadcast. "My question is straightforward. Given the mountain of evidence regarding your campaign's contacts with Russian intelligence, and the repeated conclusions of our intelligence community that Russia intervened to help you, why did you spend 8 years obstructing justice and concealing these connections from the American people?" It was a perfect question, a prosecutor's trap. It assumed the guilt in the premise. Given the mountain of evidence, it forced Trump to deny the premise, which would make him look defensive. Schiff felt a surge of adrenaline. He had delivered the line perfectly. The room waited for the explosion. They waited for Trump to yell fake news. They waited for him to insult Schiff's appearance. Instead, Trump just looked at him. He looked at him with a mix of pity and disgust. "Great question, Senator," Trump said softly. Perfect question, actually, because it lets us test your premise. Trump pointed the remote at the screen behind him. You mentioned a mountain of evidence of coordination, and you mentioned the intelligence community's conclusions. You said you've seen them. You've sat in the briefings. So let's look at the actual document from the briefing you attended on March 15th, 2017. Click. The giant screen to the left of the podium flared to life. It wasn't a graphic. It wasn't a chart. It was a high-resolution scan of a government document. The top secret header was crossed out, stamped Declassified January 15th, 2025. The text was 10 feet tall. Everyone in the room could read it. Classified Intelligence Brief. House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Gang of 8. Date: March 15th, 2017. Subject: FBI Counterintelligence Assessment. Trump Campaign/Russia. And there, highlighted in bright yellow, was the paragraph that was about to end a career. Status: no evidence of coordination or conspiracy found to date. Multiple contacts between campaign associates and Russian nationals confirmed, but contacts alone do not indicate conspiracy. Investigations continuing, but no credible intelligence suggests coordination at this time. The silence in the East Room wasn't just quiet. It was the vacuum of space. Schiff stared at the screen. He saw the date. March 15th, 2017. He remembered that briefing. He remembered sitting in the SCIF, listening to James Comey. He remembered being told exactly what was on that screen. And he remembered what he did the next day. Trump didn't say a word. He let the document sit there. He let the press corps read it. He let the camera zoom in on the words, "No evidence of coordination." Then, he pressed the remote again. The screen on the right flared up. It was a scan of a sign-in sheet. A log of attendees for the March 15th, 2017 briefing. There, third from the top, was a signature. Adam Schiff. "You were there, Adam," Trump said. His voice wasn't angry. It was matter of fact. "You signed the log. You sat in the chair. You heard the FBI tell you, unequivocally, that they had no evidence of conspiracy." Trump leaned into the microphone. "Now, let's see what you did the very next morning." Schiff's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew what was coming. He knew exactly what was coming. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. But he was frozen, pinned by the gaze of the president and the lens of the world. Click. The screen shifted to video mode. The NBC logo appeared. The date: March 16th, 2017. And suddenly, Adam Schiff was watching himself. A younger, more confident version of himself, sitting across from Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. "Chuck Todd, do you have evidence?" "Actual evidence." Adam Schiff, on screen: "I have seen more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. I have seen direct evidence." The video froze on Schiff's face. The audio hung in the air. Direct evidence. Trump looked from the screen, back to the document, and then down at Schiff. "So, Senator," Trump asked, his voice cutting through the suffocating tension, "the FBI told you on Tuesday there was no evidence. On Wednesday, you told America there was direct evidence. One of those statements is a lie. Which one is it?" The trap hadn't just sprung. It had shattered the bone. And for Adam Schiff, sitting in the front row of the White House, the nightmare was only just beginning. The silence that followed Trump's question wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, like a physical weight pressing down on the chest of everyone in the East Room. Adam Schiff stood there, the microphone slick in his hand. The image of his own face from 2017 was still frozen on the right screen, smug and certain, claiming direct evidence. The document on the left screen, signed by his own hand, still screamed "No evidence" in stark, bureaucratic font. For 8 years, Schiff had operated in a world where assertions were facts, where the seriousness of the accusation replaced the need for proof. He was used to friendly anchors nodding along. He was used to the safety of the phrase, "I cannot discuss classified sources and methods." That phrase was a shield. It was his get-out-of-jail-free card. It allowed him to hint at dark secrets that didn't exist, knowing no one could check his math. But the shield was gone. The card had been revoked. Schiff cleared his throat. It was a dry, cracking sound that the microphone picked up with cruel clarity. Mr. President, Schiff began, his voice straining for that familiar register of indignation. I think, I think you are fundamentally mischaracterizing the nature of intelligence work. Intelligence is not static. It evolves. What we knew in March of 2017 was a snapshot in time. We were seeing patterns, disturbing patterns that— Stop, Trump said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Trump raised a single finger, silencing him. You used the word evolved, Trump said, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. That's a nice word. A Washington word. It means you can change your story and pretend you were right both times. So let's test that. Let's see how the intelligence evolved after March. Trump tapped the remote. The screens refreshed. May 2017, Trump announced. The document on the left changed. Gang of 8 update. May 22nd, 2017. Subject: Crossfire Hurricane Status. Assessment: Carter Page FISA surveillance has revealed no evidence of conspiracy. George Papadopoulos interviews provided no evidence of coordination. Investigations ongoing. No new evidence of collusion. May 22nd, Trump read. 2 months later, the FBI tells you, still nothing. No conspiracy. No collusion. He hit the button. The right screen flickered. It was Schiff again, this time on CNN with Wolf Blitzer. The date stamp, May 25th, 2017. 3 days after the briefing. Adam Schiff, on screen. Wolf: the evidence of collusion is hiding in plain sight. We are connecting the dots, and the picture is becoming undeniable. Trump looked at Schiff. Is that evolution, Adam? The FBI tells you no evidence found, and 3 days later you tell Wolf Blitzer it's undeniable? That's not evolution. That's a lie. Schiff's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight. Mr. President, there were other streams of intelligence. There were allied reports. There was— July 2017. Trump interrupted, hitting the button again. The pace was picking up now. The rhythm was relentless. Bam, bam, bam. Gang of 8 briefing. July 14th, 2017. FBI summary. Multiple interviews with campaign associates completed. Manafort, Flynn, Kushner. While process crimes and unrelated financial crimes have been identified, and no evidence of election conspiracy with Russia has been established. July, Trump said. For months in, they've interviewed everyone. They're looking at taxes. They're looking at lobbying paperwork. But on the big question, the Russia question, zero. Click. Schiff on MSNBC. July 16th, 2017. 2 days later, Adam Schiff on screen. I can't go into specifics, but I can tell you that I have seen evidence that goes far beyond circumstantial. This is a very real conspiracy. The room was starting to murmur. It wasn't the press corps turning on Schiff yet. That was too much to ask of the DC establishment, but it was the sound of cognitive dissonance shattering. These reporters had booked Schiff on their shows. They had nodded along when he said these things. They had built segments, written cheer-ins, and won awards based on these quotes. Now, seeing the side-by-side comparison, the stark reality was impossible to ignore. They weren't just watching Schiff get exposed. They were watching their own complicity get projected on 10-foot screens. Do you see the pattern yet? Trump asked, leaning over the podium. He wasn't looking at Schiff anymore. He was looking at the cameras. He was speaking to the 78 million Americans watching at home. Every single time he went into that secure room, that special room where no phones are allowed, where you have to leave your ethics at the door, the FBI told him the truth. We have nothing, Senator. And every single time he walked out, found a camera, and told you the opposite. Schiff tried to interrupt again. Mr. President, the Steele dossier. Trump's eyes lit up. The dossier? I'm glad you brought that up. I really am. Schiff realized his mistake instantly. He had tried to pivot to the foundational document of the investigation, forgetting that Trump held the keys to that closet too. The Steele dossier. Trump mused. The dirty dossier. Hillary bought it. You sold it. You told America it was the Bible. You read it into the congressional record. Click. Intelligence Community Assessment. September 2017. Subject: Christopher Steele reporting. Determination: FBI has determined primary subsource was not credible. Key allegations remain unverified and likely fabricated. Dossier should not be considered reliable intelligence product. Trump pointed a finger at the text. September 2017. The FBI knew it was garbage. They knew the source was a liar. They put in writing. They told you. Click. Schiff on The View. November 2017. Adam Schiff. On screen, the dossier has been remarkably corroborated. A lot of what Christopher Steele reported has turned out to be true. The audience in the East Room actually gasped. The contrast was too sharp. Not credible versus remarkably corroborated. Trump stepped back from the podium, letting the silence stretch out again. He looked like a man who was dismantling a bomb, wire by wire, knowing exactly which one to cut because he had built the schematic. You knew, Trump said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more power than a scream. You knew the dossier was fake. You knew the FBI had found nothing. You knew the whole thing was a house of cards. But you kept building it. Schiff was sweating now, visible beads of perspiration on his forehead, catching the glare of the TV lights. He wasn't just losing the argument. He was losing the narrative. He was losing his identity. For 8 years, he had been the voice of reason, the serious man. Now, he looked like a con artist whose Ponzi scheme had just collapsed. Mr. President, Schiff said, his voice thinner now, lacking the prosecutor's base. This is selective declassification. You are cherry-picking documents to fit a narrative of victimization. Selective? Trump laughed. It was a dry, harsh bark. Adam, I didn't select these documents. You did. You selected them by attending these meetings. You selected them by signing your name on the attendance logs. I'm just showing everyone your work. Trump organized his papers on the podium. The casualness of the movement was insulting. He was treating the destruction of a U.S. senator like purely administrative work. But we're just getting started, Trump said, because it wasn't just 3 times, was it? It wasn't just 5 times. He looked at the press corps. My staff did a count. We went back through the archives. We pulled every tape, every appearance on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, every Sunday show, every podcast. Trump gestured to the screen. We counted 227 times. A murmur rippled through the room. 227. The number was staggering. 227 times, Trump repeated, letting the number hang there. 227 times you looked into a camera lens, looked the American people in the eye, and told them you had seen evidence that the FBI was telling you didn't exist. Trump looked at Schiff, whose face had gone pale, the blood draining away to leave a waxen, fearful mask. You want to see what 227 lies looks like, Senator? It takes a long time. But don't worry. We made a highlight reel. Trump pressed the button. The lights in the East Room seemed to dim as the screens synced up. This wasn't just a document anymore. This was a supercut, a montage of deception. And as the first clip began to play, showing a 2017 Adam Schiff declaring absolute proof, Adam Schiff, the man in the chair, looked down at his shoes. He couldn't watch. But he couldn't leave. The trap had closed. The first domino had fallen. And now, the rest were about to come crashing down in spectacular high-definition stereo. The audio began before the image settled. It was a cacophony of sound bites, overlapping and echoing, a chaotic overture to the main event. Then the screens synced. For the next 4 minutes, the East Room of the White House ceased to be a place of governance and became a cinema of humiliation. The video editing was brutal in its efficiency. No commentary, no voiceover, just Adam Schiff. Again and again and again. Clip, CNN, March 2017. Schiff, the evidence is not circumstantial. Clip, MSNBC, April 2017. Schiff, there is damning evidence of collusion. Clip, ABC This Week, May 2017. Schiff, the Russians had leverage. We have seen the proof. In the bottom right corner of the massive screens, a digital counter ticked upward in bright red LED font. 003/227. The effect was visceral. It was a sensory assault. At first, the room watched with the professional detachment of journalists. They scribbled notes. They glanced at the counter. But as the montage accelerated, the mood shifted. Clip, Wolf Blitzer. Schiff. I can't share it, Wolf, but it's there. It's undeniable. Clip. Rachel Maddow. Schiff. We are looking at a compromised president. 045/227. The sheer repetition began to weigh on the room physically. It wasn't just a collection of quotes. It was a rhythmic bludgeoning. You could see the pattern emerging. The same furrowed brow, the same somber tone, the same vague allusions to intelligence that he couldn't show. Adam Schiff sat in his chair, his eyes fixed on a point on the carpet about 3 feet in front of him. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He was a statue of a man wishing for the earth to open up and swallow him whole. On the screen, the seasons changed. Suits changed. Backgrounds changed. But the lie remained identical. Clip. 2018 Schiff. The walls are closing in. Clip. 2019 Schiff. The evidence of conspiracy is in plain sight. 112/227. The counter broke triple digits. A few reporters in the back of the room shifted uncomfortably. They recognized these clips. They recognized their own sets, their own logos, their own colleagues nodding along to these fabrications. The video wasn't just indicting Schiff. It was holding a mirror up to the entire industry. It was showing them exactly how easily they had been played. The montage began to speed up, a staccato drumbeat of deception. Schiff, evidence. Schiff, proof. Schiff, collusion. Schiff, conspiracy. Schiff, compromised. 189/227. It was dizzying, a kaleidoscope of the same man saying the same thing for 2,000 days. And hanging over every frame, invisible but heavy, was the ghost of the documents Trump had just shown. No evidence. No evidence. No evidence. Finally, the counter hit the limit. Clip. CNN. 2023. Schiff. History will show we were right. 227/227. The screen faded to black. The red number lingered for a second longer, burning itself into the retinas of everyone present before vanishing. The silence that returned to the East Room was different now. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a funeral, the funeral of a reputation. Trump didn't speak immediately. He let the silence do the work. He let the echo of Schiff's voice fade until the only sound was the whir of the air conditioning. 227 times, Trump said finally. His voice was soft, almost conversational. That's a lot of times to be wrong, Adam. You could be wrong once. You could be wrong twice. But 227 times, Trump leaned forward, his elbows on the podium. That's not a mistake. That's a strategy. Schiff looked up. His face was gray. The fight had drained out of him, but the instinct for self-preservation kicked in. He grabbed the microphone again. His hand was trembling, just a micro tremor, but in 4K resolution, it looked like an earthquake. "Mr. President," Schiff said, his voice raspy. "I was doing my duty. I was the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. It was my job to raise concerns. It was my job to investigate where there was smoke. And there was smoke everywhere. Your campaign manager giving polling data to Russians. The Trump Tower meeting. I was protecting the country." Protecting the country? Trump repeated. He sounded genuinely baffled. "By lying to them, I was interpreting the intelligence to the best of my ability." Schiff snapped, a flash of his old anger returning. "No," Trump corrected him instantly. "You weren't interpreting. You were inventing." Trump grabbed another stack of papers from the podium. He held them up. They were thick, bound with a clip. "See, Adam, that's the problem with what you just said. You claim you were just a concerned patriot following the smoke. But patriots don't do what you did next." Trump tossed the papers back onto the lectern with a heavy thud. Patriots don't leak classified secrets to the press to damage their political opponents. And patriots don't coordinate with reporters to plant stories that they know are false. The blood, which had been slowly returning to Schiff's face, drained away again. "You see," Trump continued, "when you were on that screen, doing your 227 shows, you were the public face. But we were curious about the private face. We were curious about how, Exactly. These anonymous sources kept appearing in the New York Times and Washington Post with classified details within hours of you leaving a briefing. Trump picked up the remote again. The FBI was curious too. They hate leaks. Leaks put agents in danger. Leaks compromise methods. So, back in 2017 and 2018, they did an investigation. They pulled phone records. Schiff stood up halfway. Mr. President, this is a violation of legislative privilege. You cannot spy on a member of Congress. I didn't spy on you, Trump said coldly. The FBI investigated a felony leak of classified information. And guess whose number kept popping up? Trump pressed a button. The screens changed again. Gone were the documents. Gone were the videos. Now, a timeline appeared. A graphical representation of a digital fingerprint. On the left, date and time of briefing. On the right, date and time of news story. In the middle, the call. Let's look at December 2016, Trump said, acting as the tour guide through Schiff's personal hell. Before I even took office, you were briefed on the Flynn call. Highly classified. SIGINT. Signals intelligence. A felony to release. Trump pointed to the screen. December 12, 2016, 4:47 p.m. Adam Schiff, cell, calls CNN producer John Bonnyfield. Duration, 15 minutes. December 12, 2016, 6 p.m. CNN breaking news. Intel chiefs briefed on Russian contacts. 15 minutes, Adam, Trump said. You walked out of the briefing, picked up your phone, and called CNN. 15 minutes later, they run the story. Schiff was standing fully now. This is outrageous. Those calls could be about anything. I speak to the press constantly. Do you? Trump asked. Let's see the next one. January 10th, 2017, 2:17 p.m. Adam Schiff calls MSNBC producer. Duration, 19 minutes. January 10th, 2017, 5 p.m. MSNBC exclusive. Classified details of Russian efforts revealed. And the next one, March 20th, 2017, 11 a.m. Gang of 8 briefing ends. March 20th, 2017, 11:14 a.m. Adam Schiff calls NYT reporter Adam Goldman. Duration, 23 minutes. March 20th, 2017, 2 p.m. NYT headline. Congressional leaders alarmed by classified briefing. The list scrolled. It kept scrolling. It was a waterfall of data. Date. Call. Leak. Date. Call. Leak. 43 times, Trump said. 43 times we can match a classified briefing directly to a phone call from your personal device to a major media outlet, followed immediately by a story containing the exact classified information you just learned. The murmuring in the room was getting louder. This was different from the lies. Lying on TV is slimy, but it's politics. Leaking SIGINT? Leaking classified briefing materials? That's a crime. That's the Espionage Act. You weren't protecting the country, Senator, Trump said, his voice hard as granite. You were running an information operation against your own government. You were taking secrets that good men and women risked their lives to get, and you were trading them for headlines. Trump walked around the podium, removing the physical barrier between him and Schiff. He stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at the senator. That's not oversight, Trump said. That's a felony. And we have the receipts. Schiff looked around the room, desperate for an ally. He looked at the CNN reporter he had spoken to 100 times. The reporter looked down at his iPad. He looked at the New York Times correspondent. She was typing furiously, not meeting his gaze. They were cutting him loose. Right there, on live television, Adam Schiff was realizing that he was no longer an asset. He was a liability. And Trump wasn't done. But the leaks were just the delivery system, Trump said, stepping back to the podium. The real masterpiece? The real work of art? That was Ukraine. Trump smiled. A dangerous, knowing smile. Do you remember the parody, Adam? Do you remember reading my phone call to the world? Schiff flinched. He knew this was the weak point. He knew this was the moment he had gone too far. Let's talk about the impeachment, Trump said. Let's talk about how you didn't just leak evidence. You manufactured it. The East Room had settled into a kind of grim fascination. The shock had worn off, replaced by the morbid curiosity of watching a car crash in slow motion. The reporters were no longer looking for sound bites. They were witnessing an autopsy. Trump stood at the podium, his demeanor shifting from the cold precision of the leak allegations to something resembling amusement. Dark, cynical amusement. "You know, Adam," Trump said, leaning casually against the presidential seal, "I've always said you missed your calling. You're a terrible senator, but you're a fantastic screenwriter." Schiff didn't respond. He sat rigid, his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were white. "Let's go back to September 2019, Trump said. "The impeachment. The big show. You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You were the ringmaster." Trump clicked the remote. The screens transported the room back in time. The setting was the austere, wood-paneled hearing room of the House Intelligence Committee. Adam Schiff sat at the dais, looking grave, the weight of the Republic seemingly on his narrow shoulders. "This is how you open the hearings," Trump narrated. The whole world was watching. Millions of people tuning in to see what the president had done. "And you decided to read them the transcript of my call with President Zelensky." The video played. Adam Schiff on screen. "The essence of what the president communicates is this: we've been very good to your country. Very good. No other country has done as much as we have. But you know what? I don't see much reciprocity here. I hear what you want. I have a favor I want from you, though. And I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it. On this and on that." The clip ended. The Adam Schiff on screen looked up, satisfied, as if he had just delivered the Gettysburg Address. In the East Room, the real Adam Schiff looked like he wanted to vomit. Trump let the clip hang there for a moment. Then, with a theatrical sigh, he pressed the button again. The screen split. On the left, Schiff's face. On the right, the actual official transcript of the call. "I want you to make up dirt," Trump read from the screen, quoting Schiff. "That sounds terrible. That sounds like a crime. That sounds like a mob boss." He pointed to the official transcript on the right. "Can you find that phrase for me, Adam? Can you find make up dirt? Can you find 7 times? Can you find don't see much reciprocity?" The text on the right was highlighted. It showed a polite, diplomatic conversation. Concerns about corruption? Yes. Mention of Biden? Yes. But the mobster dialogue? The threats? The quid pro quo? It wasn't there. "It's not there," Trump whispered. "Because I never said it. It was parody," Schiff blurted out. He couldn't help himself. It was the defense he had used back then, the lifeline he had clung to when Republicans called him out. "I stated clearly that it was the essence of the call. It was a characterization." "Parody?" Trump asked, his eyebrows shooting up. "In an impeachment hearing? You're trying to remove a sitting president, undo an election, and you decide to do stand-up comedy." Trump pulled a card from his pocket. "We did some polling, Adam. After you gave that performance, 63% of viewers believed those were my actual words. They thought I literally told Zelensky to make up dirt. You didn't tell them it was a parody until you got caught. You let millions of people believe a lie because the truth wasn't damaging enough." Trump shook his head. "That's not parody, Senator. That's fraud. You fabricated evidence and read it into the congressional record. In a court of law, you'd be disbarred. In Congress, well, Nancy Pelosi gave you a gavel." The room was silent. The parody defense had always been weak, but seeing the side-by-side comparison, the fiction versus the reality, stripped it of any legitimacy. It looked exactly like what it was, a desperate attempt to spice up a boring transcript. But the transcript, Trump waved his hand dismissively. That was just bad theater. The real crime was how the whole thing started. Trump's eyes hardened. The amusement vanished. The whistleblower, the word hung in the air like a curse. The anonymous figure who had sparked the entire impeachment saga. The brave soul who had come forward out of pure patriotism. That was the legend. That was the myth. "You remember him, right?" Trump asked. "Or her. Or them. We never found out, did we? Because you protected them. You said their identity had to be secret to protect them from me." Trump walked back to the podium and leaned into the mic. "But there was one thing you were very clear about. You went on television, on Morning Joe, right before the news broke. And you were asked, specifically, if you had any contact with the whistleblower before they filed the complaint. Click. September 17th, 2019. MSNBC. Sam Stein. Did you hear from the whistleblower beforehand? Adam Schiff. On screen. We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to. We have not spoken directly. Trump repeated. Clear. Unequivocal. You didn't know who they were. You hadn't talked to them. Trump tapped the remote. A new document appeared. It wasn't an intelligence briefing. It was a Capitol Police visitor log combined with committee staff email metadata. August 12, 2019, Trump read. 3 weeks before the complaint was filed. Who is this signing into your personal office suite, Adam? A name was redacted, but the affiliation wasn't. CIA analyst. And look at the meeting duration. 2 hours. August 14th, 2019, Trump continued. Another meeting, this time with your chief of counsel. 3 hours. August 24th, 2019. Draft of complaint circulates between a Gmail account and your staff's secure server. Trump looked up. You didn't just meet the whistleblower, Adam. You recruited him. You coached him. Your staff helped write the complaint. It wasn't a whistleblower. It was a co-conspirator. Schiff stood up, his face flushing red. My staff provides guidance to whistleblowers on proper procedure. That is standard protocol. We protect the process. You lied about it. Trump's voice boomed, cutting him off. You looked into a camera and said, we have not spoken to them. That was a lie. You were running the operation from your office. You created the complaint, filed the complaint, and then pretended to be surprised when it landed on your desk. You were the judge, the jury, and the witness. Trump gestured to the screen, where the timeline of meetings was still displayed next to Schiff's denial. This was a coup, Trump said, using the word that had been taboo for so long. Not with guns, but with paperwork, with fake transcripts, with coached witnesses. And you were the architect. The reporters were typing furiously now. This was the missing piece. Everyone in Washington had suspected Schiff's team was involved with the whistleblower, but the visitor logs? The email metadata? That was the smoking gun. It proved the impeachment wasn't an organic uprising of conscience. It was a choreographed political hit job. Schiff sank back into his chair. He looked smaller now. The righteous armor of the defender of democracy had been stripped away piece by piece. First the intelligence lies, then the leaks. Now the impeachment setup. He looked at the exit sign. It was 50 feet away. It might as well have been on Mars. But you know, Trump said, his voice dropping again, becoming almost intimate. All of that, the Russia hoax, the impeachment parody, the whistleblower, that was just politics. Dirty politics, but politics. Trump paused. He looked at Schiff with something that looked almost like disappointment. What you did in October 2020, that wasn't politics. That was election interference. That was stealing the voice of the American people. The air in the room changed instantly. Everyone knew what was coming. The third rail. The story that had been buried, banned, and censored. The story that, if it had been allowed to breathe, might have changed history. Let's talk about the laptop, Trump said. And for the first time that afternoon, Adam Schiff didn't just look scared. He looked terrified. The room felt smaller now. The walls of the East Room, draped in gold curtains and history, seemed to be closing in on the front row. October 2020, Trump said, letting the date hang in the air like the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. 3 weeks before the election. I'm running. Joe Biden is running. It's the bottom of the ninth inning. He paced slowly behind the podium. And then, the New York Post drops a bomb. The laptop from hell. Emails, photos, videos. Evidence of pay-to-play. Evidence of foreign money. Evidence that the big guy wasn't just a passive observer. Trump stopped pacing. He looked directly at the cameras. It was a disaster for the Democrats. A catastrophe. If the American people believed that laptop was real, the election was over. They needed a shield. They needed a way to kill the story. He turned his head slowly toward Adam Schiff. They needed you, Adam. Schiff was staring at his shoes again. He knew this part of the story intimately. It was his masterpiece, his greatest magic trick, making the truth disappear. So what happened? Trump asked rhetorically. The story breaks, and immediately, Adam Schiff runs to a camera. Click. CNN. October 16th, 2020. Wolf Blitzer. Does this look like Russian propaganda? Adam Schiff on screen. We know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for over a year now that they've been pushing this false narrative about the vice president and his son. Click. MSNBC. October 17th, 2020. Schiff. This is classic Russian disinformation. It has all the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. Trump paused the video on Schiff's face. Russian disinformation. Trump repeated. The hallmarks. You were so sure. You were so definitive. You told America, don't look at this. It's fake. It's Putin trying to trick you. Trump walked back to the podium and picked up a single sheet of paper. It looked fresh, crisp. Here is the problem, Senator. 3 days before you went on CNN, you had a briefing. A classified briefing from the FBI regarding the laptop. Schiff flinched. This was the document he feared most. The one that proved malice. Trump pressed the button. The left screen illuminated. Senate Intelligence Committee briefing. Classified. Date: October 13th, 2020. Subject: Forensic analysis, Hunter Biden device. Trump read the text aloud, his voice booming. FBI Cyber Division has confirmed possession of the device since December 2019. Preliminary forensic analysis confirms the device is authentic. Emails and documents appear genuine. NO intelligence indicates Russian involvement in the chain of custody or content generation. Trump slammed his hand on the podium. Whack. The FBI told you it was real, he shouted. They told you. They said, Senator, we have a laptop. It's real. The Russians had nothing to do with it. You sat there, you listened to them, you saw the report. He pointed a shaking finger at the frozen image of Schiff on the right screen. And then you walked out, looked 150 million voters in the eye, and told them it was a Russian plot. The reporters in the room were looking at each other with wide eyes. This was the smoking gun of the 2020 election. They had all reported Schiff's claim. They had all used his Russian disinfo quote to justify ignoring the laptop story. Twitter had banned the New York Post based on this narrative. Facebook had suppressed the reach. And it was all a lie that Schiff knew was a lie when he told it. But you didn't stop there, Trump said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You knew your word wasn't enough. You needed backup. You needed the experts. Trump signaled for the next slide. The letter, he announced. The famous letter. 51 former intelligence officials. Brennan, Clapper, Hayden, all the big names. Signing a letter saying the laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. The letter appeared on the screen. The signatures were magnified. It was the document that had given the media permission to bury the story. Biden had used it in the debate. Look, 50 intelligence professionals say this is garbage. For years, Trump said, you all told us this letter was organic. Just a group of concerned patriots coming together spontaneously. Trump smirked. But we have your emails, Adam. Schiff's head snapped up. A new document appeared. It was an email chain. The sender, Schiff, Adam, House Intel. The recipients, Brennan, John, Clapper, James. Date: October 16th, 2020. Subject: Urgent need. Letter on laptop story. Gentlemen, we need to kill this New York Post story. It is gaining traction. We need a statement from the IC community framing this as a Russian operation. Attached are the talking points. We need this out by tomorrow morning to give the VP cover for the debate. The room gasped. An audible, collective gasp. You orchestrated it, Trump said. You wrote the talking points. You rounded up the spies. You told them what to say and when to say it. It wasn't an intelligence assessment. It was a press release for the Biden campaign, written by your office, signed by people who never even looked at the laptop. Trump stared at Schiff, who was now trembling visibly. You used the credibility of the CIA and the NSA to censor a true story about corruption 3 weeks before a presidential election. Trump stepped away from the podium, spreading his arms wide. That's not spin, Adam. That's not politics. That is a coup against the American voter. You manipulated the information landscape to rig an election. You knew the truth because the FBI told you, and you buried it under a mountain of lies so your guy could win. The screens showing the email and the FBI briefing remained up. The evidence was irrefutable. Schiff hadn't just been wrong. He had been the architect of a massive fraud. "You got the New York Post banned from Twitter," Trump said quietly. "You got the story censored. You got millions of people to vote based on false information that you created." Trump walked back to the microphone. "I have one last question for you, Senator." The room held its breath. "When you go home tonight and you look in the mirror, do you see a hero? Or do you see the man who sold out his country for a little bit of power?" Schiff didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was closed tight. His career, his legacy, his entire life's work was burning to ash on the screens behind the president. Trump gathered his papers. He didn't need to say anything else. The show was over. He had promised a reckoning, and he had delivered an annihilation. "The American people deserve the truth," Trump said, his voice final. "They deserved better than you." He turned to the press secretary. "I'm done with him. Next question." But there were no other questions. Not really. The press corps was too busy processing the fact that the man they had treated as an oracle for 8 years was, in fact, the greatest fabulist in American political history. And Adam Schiff sat there in the wreckage, knowing that the cameras were still rolling and there was nowhere left to hide. The press conference didn't end with a bang. It ended with a shuffle. When Trump walked off the stage, disappearing behind the navy blue curtains of the East Room, the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody moved. The journalists, the people paid to talk, to shout, to query, were paralyzed. They looked at their notes, then at the blank screens where Schiff's emails had just been projected, then at each other. They were processing a trauma. Not an emotional trauma, but a professional one. They had just watched the architecture of their reality collapse. Then, the spell broke, and the sharks turned. Adam Schiff stood up. He didn't look at the press corps. He didn't smooth his jacket. He just turned toward the side exit, moving with the stiff, jerky gait of a marionette whose strings had been tangled. He had an aide with him, a young staffer with terrified eyes, who tried to clear a path. "Senator, Senator Schiff." The shout didn't come from Peter Doocy. It didn't come from a conservative outlet. It came from the Associated Press. "Senator, do you dispute the authenticity of the emails shown by the president?" Schiff kept walking, eyes fixed on the door handle. "Senator," shouted a voice from CBS News, "did you coordinate with the CIA to suppress the laptop story?" "Senator, why did you tell Chuck Todd you had direct evidence?" "Senator, are you going to resign?" For 8 years, the hallway walk and talk had been Schiff's favorite sport. He loved the gaggle. He loved stopping to offer a grave soundbite about threats to democracy. But today, the gaggle wasn't a fan club. It was a mob. And they were angry, not because he lied to the country, but because he had made them look like fools. He pushed through the double doors, his aide shoving a camera lens out of the way, and disappeared into the corridor. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was the loudest confession in Washington history. By 5 p.m., the internet wasn't just talking, it was screaming. We talk about things going viral, but that implies a biological spread, something that takes time to infect a host. This wasn't viral. This was a digital supernova. The clip of Trump asking, "How many times did you lie, Senator?" hit 93 million views on X, formerly Twitter, in the first 90 minutes. It was shared by Elon Musk, by Joe Rogan, by random teenagers on TikTok who didn't know who Adam Schiff was but knew a body bag moment when they saw one. But it wasn't just the dunks. It was the receipts. That was the difference. Usually, political scandals are he said, she said. They are open to interpretation. Well, it depends on your definition of is that. Not this time. The internet sleuths, the autists of 4chan, and the independent journalists of Substack went to work. The White House had uploaded the entire 847-page declassified file to a public server. Within hours, it was being dissected, categorized, and memed. The Schiff Supercut became the most popular video on YouTube. Someone set it to the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song. Another version overlaid the Law and Order DUN sound effect every time the video cut from a no evidence document to Schiff saying, "I have proof." The hashtag Schifflid trended #1 globally, not just in the US. In the UK, in Australia, in Japan. The world was watching the humiliation of the American establishment. But the most damaging content wasn't the mockery. It was the side-by-sides. An infographic started circulating. Simple black background. Left side, the FBI document, March 2017, no evidence of conspiracy. Right side, Adam Schiff, March 2017, I have seen direct evidence. Bottom text, who is lying to you? It was shared 400,000 times on Facebook before the fact-checkers could even wake up. And when they did wake up, they found themselves in a terrifying position. They couldn't fact-check it. The document was real. The video was real. There was no missing context. There was no mostly false. The truth was absolute, and it was radioactive. Inside the cable news green rooms, panic set in. CNN was in a meltdown. Their primetime lineup was built on the foundation that Trump was a Russian asset and Schiff was the hero. Now, they had to go on air. Anderson Cooper looked like he had seen a ghost. He opened his show with a somber monologue about troubling questions and the weaponization of declassification. The president, Cooper intoned, has chosen to release highly sensitive documents in a chaotic manner, clearly designed to embarrass a political opponent. He tried to frame it as a process foul. Trump shouldn't have released them, but his guest, a former federal prosecutor who usually towed the party line, went rogue. Anderson, I have to stop you, the guest said, cutting him off. I've read the documents. I've looked at the briefing logs. Schiff's signature is right there. He signed the log on Tuesday and went on your show on Wednesday and said the opposite. We can't spin this. He lied to us. He lied to you. Cooper stared at the camera, blinking. The producer screamed in his earpiece to cut to commercial. But it was too late. The clip was already being clipped. Over on MSNBC, it was even worse. They tried to ignore it. They ran a segment on climate change, then a segment on a new bill in Florida. But the comment section of their live stream was a wall of text. Talk about Schiff. Show the documents. Why are you hiding it? By the next morning, the dam broke. Even the New York Times, the paper that had won Pulitzers for reporting on the Russia collusion story, had to face reality. The headline was buried on page A14, and the language was tortured, but it was their declassified files show discrepancies between intelligence assessments and lawmaker statements. It was a soft headline, discrepancies, like a bank error. But in the body of the article, the Times had to admit the truth. The newly released FBI assessment from 2017 state definitively that no conspiracy had been found, a conclusion that stands in contrast to Senator Schiff's frequent public assertions during that period. It was the polite journalistic way of saying, "You made it all up." By the end of the first week, the political fallout had turned from a storm into a landslide. Adam Schiff was hiding. He hadn't been seen in public since the press conference. His office was dark. His phone lines were unplugged. He was holed up in his Burbank home, presumably watching his career burn down on cable TV. But he couldn't hide from the numbers. A Gallup poll released 5 days after the press conference showed the devastation. Do you believe Adam Schiff is trustworthy? Yes, 12% no, 78%. Should Adam Schiff resign from the Senate? Yes, 71%. 71%. That wasn't just Republicans. That was independents. That was suburban moms. That was a significant chunk of Democrats who felt betrayed. They had donated to him. They had bought his justice as coming merchandise. They had believed him when he said he had the goods. Now they realized they were the marks in a long con. The most dangerous noise, however, wasn't coming from the voters. It was coming from inside the building. The Senate is a club. It protects its own, usually. But Adam Schiff was toxic now. He was radioactive waste. If you stood next to him, you got burned. If you defended him, you were a liar too. Senator Chuck Schumer was cornered by reporters in the hallway. Usually, he'd offer a robust defense of his colleague. The president is playing politics, he'd say. Not today. I haven't had a chance to review all the documents, Schumer mumbled, walking briskly toward the elevator. We take the handling of classified information very seriously. The Ethics Committee will have to look at this. The Ethics Committee. That was the signal. It was the code word for he's on his own. When a majority leader points you toward the Ethics Committee, he's not throwing you a lifeline. He's measuring you for a coffin. Within 48 hours, the complaints started piling up, not just from partisan firebrands like Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene. These were formal complaints filed by legal watchdogs, citing specific statutes. 18 U.S. Code Section 798, Disclosure of Classified Information. 18 U.S. Code Section 1001, False Statements. The Department of Justice, now under a new Trump-appointed Attorney General, announced a preliminary review of the leak allegations. The words grand jury started floating around Washington cocktail parties. Adam Schiff had spent 8 years trying to put Donald Trump in prison. Now, in a twist of irony so sharp it could cut glass, he was the one looking up criminal defense attorneys on Google. The hunter had become the prey, and the jungle was closing in. The United States Senate is often called the world's greatest deliberative body. It likes to project an image of clubby collegiality, of seersucker suits and bean soup and polite disagreement. But anyone who has spent time in Washington knows the truth. The Senate is a pack of wolves in bespoke tailoring. And when one wolf is wounded, truly, fatally wounded, the pack doesn't help him. They eat him. 2 months after the press conference, Adam Schiff walked onto the Senate floor not as a colleague, but as a defendant. The atmosphere was sepulchral. The galleries were packed, but silent. There was no whispering, no paper shuffling, just the heavy, oppressive weight of history being written in real time. The motion on the floor wasn't just a reprimand. It was a resolution of censure and expulsion from committee assignments. It was the political equivalent of a dishonorable discharge. Senator Rand Paul stood at his desk. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply held up the dossier, the same declassified file Trump had unleashed in the East Room. "Mr. President," Paul began, his voice echoing in the chamber. "We are not here today to debate policy. We are not here to debate the merits of the previous administration. We are here to answer a simple question. Can a member of this body use the highest security clearance in the land as a license to lie to the people who granted it?" He opened the dossier. The evidence before us is not partisan. It is not opinion. It is a timeline of verifiable deceit. Senator Schiff attended briefing A, which said no evidence. He then went to the cameras and claimed direct evidence. He did this not once, not twice, but hundreds of times. He leaked signals intelligence, a felony for anyone else in this room, to further a political narrative. He fabricated a transcript of a presidential call during an impeachment hearing. Paul looked across the aisle directly at the Democratic caucus. If we allow this to stand, if we say that this behavior is acceptable because our side did it, then the oversight power of this body is dead. The Intelligence Committee is dead. Because no one, not the FBI, not the CIA, and certainly not the American people, will ever trust us again. Schiff sat at his desk in the back row. He looked diminished. The arrogance that had fueled him for years was gone, replaced by a sullen, hollowed-out exhaustion. He stared straight ahead, focusing on the back of the senator in front of him, refusing to make eye contact with the men and women he had served with for decades. But the knife didn't truly twist until a Democrat stood up. It was Joe Manchin. Or maybe it was a new face, a moderate from a swing state looking to survive the next election. Let's say it was a rising star from the Midwest, someone who could read the polls. "Mr. President," the Democrat said, speaking slowly, painfully, "I have served with Adam for a long time. I consider him a friend." The "but" hung in the air like a guillotine blade. But the documents are undeniable. We cannot have a standard where truth is optional. We cannot have a standard where classified intelligence is weaponized for partisan gain. The integrity of this institution is more important than any one member. That was it. The dam broke. When the roll call vote began, it wasn't a party line defense. It was a rout. "Mr. Alexander?" "Aye." "Ms. Baldwin?" "Nay." "Mr. Barrasso?" "Aye." The names ticked by, and then the crossover started. Democrats in red states. Democrats facing tough re-elections. Democrats who just hated the fact that Schiff had made them look like idiots for 8 years. Aye, aye, aye. The final tally flashed on the electronic board. Yeas, 67 nays, 33. 17 Democrats had crossed the aisle. It was a supermajority, a bloodbath. The presiding officer read the result, his voice devoid of emotion. The yeas are 67. The nays are 33. The resolution is agreed to. Schiff didn't move. He sat there while the clerk read the formal censure into the record. It was a brutal text, drafted to be read by history students 100 years from now. Resolved that Senator Adam Schiff be censured for conduct that brings disrepute upon the Senate, for systematically misrepresenting classified intelligence, for coordinating with a whistleblower while denying such contact, for abusing his position of trust to deceive the American public. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his legacy. He was stripped of his seat on the Intelligence Committee. The irony was poetic. The man who had built his entire identity around being the intel guy, the keeper of secrets, the watcher in the dark, was now barred from entering the room. He was locked out. His security clearance was suspended pending the DOJ review. He was, for all intents and purposes, neutered. When the session adjourned, Schiff stood up to leave. Usually, after a vote, the floor is a hive of activity. Handshakes, backslaps, deal-making. Not today. As Schiff moved toward the aisle, the sea parted. Senators turned their backs. They checked their phones. They suddenly found the ceiling architecture fascinating. Nobody wanted to be in the frame of the C-SPAN camera when Adam Schiff walked by. He walked the long aisle alone, a ghost in a room full of living men. Outside the Capitol, the humiliation continued. Schiff had to walk down the famous steps. Usually, he would stop at the bank of microphones. He would hold court. Today, the microphones were there, but he walked past them. Senator, how does it feel to be censured? Senator, 17 of your own colleagues voted against you. Do you have a comment? Senator, are you worried about the DOJ investigation? He kept walking, his head down, flanked by Capitol Police. He got into a waiting black SUV. As the door closed, a cameraman caught a glimpse of his face through the tinted glass. He looked old, not elder statesman old, defeated old. The face of a man who realizes too late that he bet everything on a lie and lost. The Schiff Accountability Act followed swiftly. It was a piece of legislation born out of embarrassment. It established new, draconian penalties for leaking classified info. It required members of the Gang of Eight to sign affidavits certifying they wouldn't misrepresent briefings. Schiff voted against it, of course. He was one of only 11 votes. A final, petty act of defiance from a man who knew the law was named after him. But the real punishment wasn't in the Senate chamber. It was in the culture. Adam Schiff became a punchline. Late-night hosts, sensing the wind had changed, started cracking jokes. You know, my wife told me she didn't eat the last slice of pizza. She pulled an Adam Schiff, said she had direct evidence the dog did it. Saturday Night Live, which had canonized him as a hero for years, did a skit where Schiff, played as a paranoid, bug-eyed neurotic, kept trying to show people secret invisible documents that only he could see. It was cruel. It was unfair, perhaps, to the actor. But it was devastatingly effective. Schiff's book deal? Canceled. The publisher issued a brief statement citing market conditions, but everyone knew the truth. You can't sell a memoir titled Saving Democracy when the Senate has just officially declared you a liar. His speaking fees? Evaporated. The corporate boards? Closed. The law firms? They didn't want the liability. He was still a senator, technically. He had 2 years left in his term, but he was a zombie. He had no committee assignments, no influence, no friends. He wandered the halls of the Russell building like a specter, ignored by pages, avoided by colleagues. And hanging over his head, growing darker every day, was the shadow of the Department of Justice. The preliminary review had become a formal investigation. Subpoenas were flying. Staffers were flipping. The leak investigation was heating up. The censure was the political death. The legal death was still approaching. But Adam Schiff, in a final act of ego, refused to resign. He clung to the seat, believing perhaps that he could outlast the storm. He thought if he just stayed quiet, if he just kept his head down, the American people would forget. He forgot one thing. The American people might have short memories, but the internet never forgets. And Donald Trump? Donald Trump never forgives. 6 months is a long time in politics. It's long enough for a news cycle to die, for a scandal to fade, for the public to move on to the next shiny object. Usually. But the stain of the Schiff dossier was indelible. It wasn't a scandal, it was a scar. And Adam Schiff, sitting alone in his office in the Hart Senate building, finally realized that the bleeding wasn't going to stop. The internal polling was the final straw. His campaign manager, one of the few who hadn't resigned yet, put the binder on his desk. It was brutal. In a hypothetical Democratic primary for his own seat, Schiff was trailing generic Democrat by 42 points. He was trailing a local weatherman by 12. He couldn't win. He couldn't even run. So, on a gray Tuesday morning in Los Angeles, Adam Schiff summoned the cameras one last time. The setting was a podium in a generic hotel ballroom. No flags, no cheering supporters, just a backdrop of blue drapes and a dozen reporters who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Schiff walked out. He looked thinner. The sharp, tailored suits seemed to hang off him now. The glint in his eye, that fanatical spark that had powered 2 impeachments, was extinguished. After much consideration, Schiff began, reading from a teleprompter that seemed to reflect in his glassy eyes. And after consultation with my family, I have decided to resign from the United States Senate, effective immediately. The cameras clicked, but the room lacked energy. It felt less like a breaking news event and more like the reading of a will. I have dedicated my life to public service, Schiff continued, his voice devoid of the old theatrical vibrato. I am proud of the work we did to hold power accountable. But the current political climate, the polarization, makes it impossible for me to serve my constituents effectively. He didn't apologize. He didn't mention the documents. He didn't mention the 227 lies or the fabricated transcript or the leaks. He went out the way he came in, wrapping himself in a narrative of victimhood, blaming the climate rather than his own conduct. He took no questions. He walked off the stage, got into a sedan, and drove away. The career of Adam Schiff, the man who thought he would be Attorney General, the man who dreamed of the presidency, ended not with a bang, but with a press release and a traffic jam on the 405. The vacuum he left was filled quickly. In the special election that followed, the voters of California didn't just reject Schiff. They rejected his entire brand of politics. Katie Porter, the whiteboard-wielding congresswoman, won the seat in a landslide. Her campaign slogan was subtle but devastating: transparency. For real. During her victory speech, she didn't mention Schiff by name, but she didn't have to. "We need leaders," she told the cheering crowd, "who use their security clearance to protect the American people, not to manipulate them. We need leaders who know the difference between a classified briefing and a political weapon." The applause was deafening. It was the sound of a party turning the page. The Democrats wanted to win again, and they knew they couldn't win carrying the baggage of the Russia hoax. Schiff was the sacrificial lamb they had to slaughter to regain their credibility. 1 year after the press conference, Palm Beach, Florida, the sun was setting over Mar-a-Lago, casting long, golden shadows across the patio. Donald Trump sat at a white iron table, sipping a Diet Coke. He looked relaxed. The tension of the campaign, the anger of the impeachment years, it seemed to have melted away in the Florida heat. A reporter from Time magazine sat across from him. They were doing a retrospective piece, The Year of Truth. "Mr. President," the reporter asked, looking back on that day in the East Room, "do you have any regrets? Some people say it was too harsh, that you destroyed a man's life on live television." Trump smiled. It wasn't a gloating smile. It was the smile of a man who knows he won the war. "Regrets?" Trump asked, leaning back. "No, I have no regrets. It had to be done." "But was it personal?" the reporter pressed. "It wasn't personal," Trump said, shaking his head. "It was necessary. You have to understand, for 8 years, this country was held hostage by a lie. A lie that said the president was a traitor. A lie that tore families apart. A lie that stopped us from getting along with Russia, which could have prevented a war." Trump gestured with his hand, as if sweeping away a fly. Adam Schiff was the face of that lie. He was the architect. He used his position, a very powerful position, to tell people, "Trust me, I know secrets you don't know." And because of that, people believed him. They had to. They respected the office. Trump leaned in, his voice dropping to a serious register. I didn't destroy his life. I just turned on the lights. He destroyed his own life when he decided to lie 227 times. All I did was show the receipts. Do you feel vindicated? The reporter asked. Trump looked out at the ocean. I feel relieved, he said finally. Relieved that the truth is finally written down. You know, history is written by the victors. But in this case, history was written by the documents. The declassification. That's the legacy. Nobody can ever say you didn't know again. It's all there. He took a sip of his drink. The lesson is simple, Trump said. When a politician tells you they have secret evidence, demand to see it. And if they won't show you, assume they're lying. Because usually they are. The legacy of the Schiff affair rippled far beyond the Senate. In journalism schools, professors updated their syllabuses. A new course module was added, the perils of anonymous sources and classified claims. Students studied the Schiff cycle, leak, publish, validate, repeat, as a cautionary tale of how the media allowed itself to be weaponized by a source. In the intelligence community, the reforms were quiet but deep. The Schiff rules, the nickname stuck despite official attempts to rebrand them, changed the culture. Briefers became terrified of being misrepresented. They started keeping their own transcripts of briefings with Congress members. Trust but verify. And on the internet, the memory lived forever. Adam Schiff's Wikipedia page became a battleground for a month, but eventually, the editors settled on a new opening paragraph. It no longer led with his role as an impeachment manager. It read, Adam Bennett Schiff is a former American politician who served as a United States Senator. His career ended in resignation following a Senate censure and investigations into his systematic misrepresentation of classified intelligence regarding the Russia investigation. The 227 Lies video remained on YouTube. It had 400 million views. It was shown in political science classes. It was used in documentaries. It became the definitive visual record of the era. As for Schiff himself, he vanished. He didn't go on Dancing with Stars. He didn't become a lobbyist, too toxic. He moved to a quiet suburb in Maryland, far from the cameras, far from the microphones. Occasionally, someone would spot him at a grocery store or a gas station. They would snap a photo. He always looked the same, head down, hat pulled low, pushing a cart quickly toward his car. The face of a man who was once the most powerful prosecutor in Washington, now reduced to a ghost story. The final verdict wasn't delivered by a judge. It wasn't delivered by a jury. It was delivered by a single, undeniable truth projected on a screen for the world to see. No evidence found. And in the end, that was the only sentence that mattered.